Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The slugfest and bloodlust continue unabated. Trump and the media have one thing in common: contempt for the other. Also, the new administration's foreign policy remains all over the place. Cross-talking Trump and the media. I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Mark Sleboda. He's an international affairs and security analyst. We also have Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. And we also have Alex Christoforou. He is the director and the writer for the Duran.com. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. And I always appreciate it, particularly today, because there's so much to talk about. Let me just throw out some of the topics here. Well, Bannon's strategy at CPAC, essentially saying a daily fight for deconstruction of the administrative state. We have the President of the United States. He's going to boycott the White House correspondent dinner. We have an MSNBC host, Mika Brzezinski, saying it's the media's job to, quote, control exactly what people think, not Trump. I thought that was amazing. And we had Trump coming out again calling such news organizations as CNN is fake news. So I said slugfest and bloodlust. It continues.
Well, I mean, the problem is that this technology has been tried many times. Let's face it. It has been tried in Ukraine. It has been tried in the former Yugoslavia. So Mr. Trump is just surprised at something that had been done to other people and other countries dozens of times. You know, his speech to CPAC, where he says that I'm not against the press. I'm just against the people that make up stories and make up sources. Well, wake up. They have been making up stories about babies being thrown on the ground in Iraq since 1991.
You're absolutely right. But shouldn't Steve Bannon, Alex, know this and the dangers of it here? Because, you know, I'm glad this monopoly, this media monopoly, is being broken up. It's absolutely essential to do that. However, it's dangerous as well. CNN now acts like it's a martyr, okay? And, you know, I know why Trump is doing this, and I know why his advisors are doing this, because they're appealing to his base. I mean, okay, this is called politics here, but it's full of it's a minefield at the same time.
Yeah, you know, Steve Bannon's speech at the CPAC really didn't get that much press coverage, but it was a fascinating speech that he did with the interview with Rights Previous. And really, Steve Bannon hit upon 3 points of Trumpism. And the first point was to stop the international parasites, the people that are feeding off of the U.S. military-industrial complex, the money and the protection that the U.S. gives for security. That was his first point. The second point that he hit on was America first in economics. He drove that home, that economics, trade deals, migration is all about American interests.
Everyone calls economic nationalism. Okay, yeah. Third point?
And the third point was drain the swamp. He hit upon that point again. We're going to drain the swamp. We're going to remove corruption from Washington, D.C. So Bannon really hit upon the 3 points that define, I would say, Trumpism.
Okay, well, good idea, but pipe dream, Mark?
Yeah. If you compare the speeches at CPAC, Trump gave an introduction attacking what he calls the fake media, and then delivered his boilerplate campaign speech. Nothing really to see there. Bannon's speech was far more interesting, far more detailed. It should have gotten more coverage, and I think people should be paying more attention to him, as has been said by others, that he is the brain behind Trumpism, such as it exists. One thing that they both speeches concentrated on was a message of anti-neoliberal and in trade and economically, socially postmodern liberal globalization. That is what is the consistent element across these.
When I was looking at the coverage of it later, you know, Steve Bannon, Trump support economic nationalism. But my takeaway was that from a different word, it was sovereignty. Is pushing the sovereign rights of the United States, particularly in an economic way. That sounds very differently than nationalism, because we all know that nationalism has a very tainted history. It's used and abused as a term. Go ahead.
Incorrectly.
It's
Incorrectly,
true,
yes.
You know, if you look at the actions of the U.S. administrations, at least since George Bush the Jr. came to power, I mean, none of them was in the interest of the United States as a country. You know, the invasion of Iraq was a tragedy for the United States. 4,000 people killed. Many more maimed.
And many more killed in Iraq. Let's not forget that.
And probably 1 million Iraqis killed if we follow some statistics. You know, the image of the United States was crushed. So who benefited? Only the globalist, neoliberal, ideological forces. Ukraine, Ukraine got poorer, Russia got poorer, they became less interesting as markets for the United States and for the EU. Did anyone get at least demoted? At least, did anyone lose his or her job because of this? No. This is the problem with the neoliberal, mixture of neoliberal, neocon ideology. It is an ideology which feeds upon itself, which is not in the interest of the United States, which is not in the interest of the EU members. It is in the interest of people who believe in it and who get money from it.
But, one of the interesting things was that you had Nigel Farage also speaking at the CPAC, and that drives home your point on sovereignty. So here's Nigel Farage tying together the Brexit with the U.S. elections, and pretty much the encompassing theme was that it's about sovereignty. It's about a country finally taking back its sovereignty as a nation state, whether that's with trade, whether that's with immigration, or whether that's with foreign policy. So having Farage speak to American conservatives was actually, driving home that point that it's all about the nation state against the U.S. sovereignty, America first.
It's very interesting. We see different players playing to their base right now. But it's interesting, and Mark, you predicted this, if Trump had won, and then after he won, you predicted it again, is it this rift between the United States and the European Union? I mean, the European Union is always depicted as this kind of nice snowflake, fluffy, happy, positive little thing. And now it's a war of words coming out across the Atlantic.
Yeah, very much. At the Munich Security Conference, the head of the Munich Security Conference, the president, the German Ischinger, he said outright that Trump's words about the EU, where he did call it into question and he supported Brexit, he said that was a declaration of war on the EU. Right? This is the United States, the president of the United States declaring war on the EU, according to the Europeans. And a war without weapons, he said. And this shows...
Well, that's typically European Union. Yeah, they got all the right tools, right?
During the Bush years, they spoke about the U.S. as Mars and Europe as Venus. The truth is that the European Union has become an exceptionalist ideological state of its own, in many ways more odious than the United States on the world stage. And this rift that is inevitable while Trump is president between the EU and the United States is probably the best single thing that Trump will ever accomplish while in office.
Okay, well, that's an opinion. That's a very strong opinion there. Go ahead, Dima.
Well, I've just returned from Europe. I've just returned from Germany. And what do the papers write there? It's not just Ischinger. It's the Malta summit of the EU leaders, which says that Trump and his possible alliance with Putin, that is the greatest threat to the European civilization. My God, I thought these were probably some population movements, probably some economic problems. No, it's just Trump saying, why don't we have good relationship with Russia? That is the threat to the EU. And if you look at history, if you look at recent history, the EU is already, 24 years old now. Which country did the EU reconcile itself with? Okay, the United States reconciled themselves with Cuba. Turkey reconciles itself with Russia. The EU only created new enemies. When the expansion took place in the early 2000s, we were told that, grown-up adult members like Germany and France, they would teach Poland manners. Poland would become more peaceful towards Russia. The opposite happened. If you look at the rhetoric coming from the Munich conference, from the Germans, from the French, it is the same rhetoric we had been hearing from the most radical Poles. And at the same time, if you read the European press, Poland and Hungary now are described as authoritarian, hostile countries ruled by a mixture of fascists and authoritarian leaders.
This gets down to the ideological blinders that we've talked about a number of times on this program. They can't seem to absorb change and change that's going on around them. We have countries now, like the UK, at least in the United States under Trump, protecting their sovereignty. Sovereignty is antithetical to the entire EU mission.
Yeah, and you have Le Pen, who's really gaining some traction. I remember you mentioned Geert Wilders, who's also gaining a lot of traction in the Netherlands. So you have this whole sovereign nation-state movement in the EU
But
that's
this is
moving forward. But
this is a reaction.
It's a backlash.
Okay, it's a backlash.
Yeah.
Because I don't see it as organic as, oh, how people are so afraid of these movements. It's a backlash.
But you also have EU states that are imploding from within. Greece, Italy, all these countries are being destroyed from within, and the EU is focusing on all these external enemies.
Well, that's like communism. The idea is great. It's just being implemented badly. But this is a repeat of history here. Okay,
And
you
we
need to rethink the entire process.
And we can get rid of individual leaders, like...
individuals, and then everything else will be fine.
Why did Trump win in the United States? Because Hillary was stupid. Why is Wilders making gains in Holland? Because the prime minister is bad.
So it's never
the ideology.
There's never a
personalities.
systemic critique.
Yeah. The postmodern, technocratic, liberal elite that rules the EU is doing the same thing that the Democrats in the United States did. The EU has never been more fragile in its existence.
And it has such a hostile rhetoric.
And it is actually looking at falling apart. So rather than address their own issues, rather than address the backlash that has developed from both their economically neoliberal and their socially postmodern liberal policies, they're trying to create a fictitious enemy. This enemy they've termed an international nationalism, and they see it being propagated by Russia, put under the bed, now by Trump, and basically they're saying, this is what they're saying, is that anyone, conservative, anyone who goes against our liberal narrative, our liberal hegemony, is Hitler.
So,
that's
Alex,
how
20
ridiculous it
seconds.
is.
So that's a testament to Western tolerance.
Yeah, of course, the liberals are tolerant, the liberal left is tolerant of everybody. But as Farage said in his speech, he says the liberals have become illiberal, and they're looking for fascists everywhere, and they just don't understand that they are indeed become the fascists.
They never were liberal.
Well, all right, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Trump and the media. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Trump and the media. Okay, let me go back to Mark here. During the break, you said you wanted to have a comment on Bannon's draining the swamp.
Yeah, we talked about it last week, and Alex brought it up this week. Draining the swamp in the Trump administration. Okay, it's a powerful meme. And the swamp that Trump needs and intends to drain, the swamp in the foreign policy blob, the State Department, Foggy Bottom, and the intelligence services, he can't do now. He's been severely hampered by the scalp of Flynn that he himself, in the end, surrendered. A big mistake of his. They didn't take him away. Flynn didn't do anything illegal. He was surrendered, right, for PR. And it is a huge mistake. And now he has no one with institutional heft. As Flynn, as former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency under Obama, might have been able to reform the intelligence agencies, remove the DNI, and so on. That's impossible now. But when we talk domestically, all right, the idea of Trump draining the swamp is a joke. He's appointed nearly as many Goldman Sachs executives as Obama, and he's put in place people across the country whose primary position is to get rid of the departments that they've been put in charge of.
But see, we're seeing a contradiction. It's because in the first part of this program we talked about sovereignty. Now, how do we square not draining the swamp, foreign policy, and the lever, the way on the side of sovereignty? It is a contradiction.
It is a contradiction.
Well, I think that the story with Flynn is very dangerous. Why? Because there were several crises in relations between the Soviet Union and the United States, which were resolved through secret negotiations with Russian or Soviet ambassador participating. Remember how George Kennan, he talked with the Russian foreign policy executive Malik, and they diffused the crisis, I think, around Berlin. When Nicholas Daniel was arrested in Moscow in 1986, Anatoly Dobrynin, the ambassador,
talked to people in Washington.
Now it's becoming dangerous. Now it's becoming dangerous to talk to the Russian ambassador.
But the thing is that we had, with Flynn, he was not officially a member of the government. Mm-hmm. We have a deep state that does doesn't want to have negotiations. I mean, back then, it was an existential threat to everyone's existence. They're blind to that now. They're resistant to any kind of negotiation because the negotiation means compromise. Well, this mindset doesn't allow it.
If another crisis happens, like the one around Cuba or the one around Berlin, there will be no officials to have guts to talk to the Russians.
Gentlemen, I wasn't going to say on this program, but I'm waiting for that incident, okay? And I don't know what it is going to be, but I'm expecting it soon. Go ahead.
But you do have in the Trump administration, you have the one side, which are the insiders, the Goldman Sachs guys, the generals, really establishment people who are in Trump's cabinet. On the other side, you have people that don't really form policy, like Bannon, Conway, Miller, who are advising Trump. So you do have kind of a clash of cultures. And you saw Flynn, who I would say it leans more on the not insider side of things, pushed out. So you do have this this inability to square the circles. You have two different groups.
We have a non-existent Trump foreign policy. First, it was all over the place. Right. Now, it's not even speaking. Rex Tillerson, the new Secretary of State, hasn't even had so much as a press conference yet. I don't know what he's doing. I want to start a new kids book. Where's Rex Tillerson? We can try to find him.
Okay, let's get another thing that we can talk about here. Who would have thought Sweden would play a major role in mainstream American politics here? Dima, I was mystified. I continue to be mystified by it all.
It's just great because Trump made this mistake. You know, he talked about Sweden. He probably wanted to talk about another country.
I watched the speech. He didn't make a mistake. He just should have been more precise.
Oh, I mean, terrible things now happen in all European countries, including the Nordic ones, which used to be, you know, the areas of peace. And when the media lashed out at Trump, there were riots in Sweden. You know, the riots happened not yesterday; they happened tomorrow. But this is the problem. You know, that Munich conference that Mark has just mentioned. You know, at this conference, Wolfgang Ischinger, the main organizer, said that we have in the world today the confrontation between the good liberals and nasty xenophobic populists. The nasty xenophobic populists are the people who are now winning elections in Europe. Why? Because people are fed up with uncontrolled migration, with Europe being dragged into wars that it doesn't
you're
want to
absolutely
have.
right. But you know what they're fusing together is immigration and Islam. People are angry about immigration first and foremost, and the left is trying to taint anyone that is against unfettered immigration. You know, free borders. You know,
why is immigration happening? Because of the policies of the EU and the United States in the Middle East.
Just stop
so if
bombing
you're
their
against
countries.
this policy, if you want to stop bombing Libya, you are an Islamophobe, you know. So, you know, they don't allow the people to criticize the government for the policies that led to mass migration from the Middle East to Europe.
Let's talk about another major change. Again, Western media wasn't really interested in it, but now we have Iraq participating overtly in the conflict in Syria. The Iraqi Air Force, all outfitted by the United States and the American taxpayer, from what we understand, coordinated on some level with the Damascus government to start attacking ISIS. We have a president that came to power. He needs his big plan. Well, everybody seems to be fighting ISIS except for the United States, or maybe just the contrary. We don't know. But this, you know, when you go back to 2003, the illegal invasion of Iraq to remake the Middle East, my goodness, now Iraq is aligned with Russia, Iran, Syria. What a change of fortune, Alex.
Look, I think this is a story that hasn't been reported on, but if you go to the Duran.com, Alexander Mercouris really wrote an excellent piece on this recent strike against ISIS in Syria by Iraq. And really, at first, it sounds like Iraq may be attacking Syria, but in essence, like you just said, there was probably some level of coordination because they're both bordering countries. They're both fighting the same enemy. And under international law, as Mr. Mercouris pointed out, there is a standing for Iraq to attack ISIS within Syria's border. Now, people have different opinions, and they say the U.S. is a country that abuses these rules of attacking enemies in other countries. But the case is made that they do have a common enemy, and they are bordering nations that need to eradicate that enemy.
Yeah, okay. The U.S. and its allies use the argument that Damascus is unable or unwilling to fight terrorism. No, that is not true. And the United States and its allies bomb Syria illegally, repeatedly against international law. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I don't particularly like that argument because we've seen Turkey and the United States and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who actually directly support ISIS, use that argument
but Mark,
for their
the issue is
intervention
what
in
kind of
Syria.
coordination there was with Damascus. That's what's
that
at
is
point.
important. And the fact that Damascus has not overtly criticized the action
Probably means that they did.
There was
Russia and
there
Iran
was
did.
some coordination, and this is a good thing. And if there is direct coordination, and there should be, and I don't see no reason why there shouldn't be, this is a good thing, because after Mosul is liberated, then Iraqi troops can help liberate Raqqa from ISIS. And this is a problem because the U.S.'s Kurds can't do it on their own. Turkey and Saudi Arabia both want to do it to help carve up Syria and create their Salafistan in the east, but they don't have the ability to do it space-wise. The Syrian Arab Army is in the way, and they certainly won't ally with the U.S.'s Kurds. So Iraq might be able to help the Syrian Arab Army on the state. But here again, with Saudi Arabia and the issue of Salafists in Syria, Trump's speeches against radical Islam, again and again, it's domestically, foreign policy, everything, until he recognizes that Saudi Arabia and Qatar, as the primary exporters of this Wahhabist ideology, Salafism, which is the biggest motivating factor of what we call international terrorism, that is radical Islam. Iran is not radical Islam. Sufis are not radical Islam. They're not a danger to anyone.
I won't go into details of Salafism versus Shiite radicals. I just remember one thing. When the civil war in Syria started in 2011 and the West started supporting the insurgents there, the Iraqi Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, said two things. First, that is a very bad thing. It will spread to Iraq. True. Second, the Islamists will win and they will be a danger to everyone. True. Also. He was toppled, basically, with the support from the United States. The United States said he was bad, he prevented them from doing, establishing peace in Syria.
He has to go, Mandra,
He has to go. He was unfair to the Sunni minority. You know, later on, Iraq had to allow the Russian planes through to Syria, and the United States could not even object to it because they made such a mess in Syria.
Well, and plus, Iraq is supporting its own sovereignty. We keep going back to this.
We have to remember that ISIS evolved in Iraq.
Exactly.
In the aftermath of the U.S. invasion, in these torture jails that the U.S. helped set up in Iraq with a marginalized Sunni population. And then it filtered into Syria in the power vacuum created by the West's and the Gulf monarchies' proxy war on Syria.
You know, Alex, what's really interesting here is that as the U.S. is at war with itself, if we can put it that way, we have the UK absorbed with Brexit, is that we're seeing a major foreign policy issue being resolved in the region, one way or another, which it should have always been in the first place. People taking care of their neighborhood. Maybe this is not such a bad idea, that the U.S. is distracted, the U.K. is distracted, the EU is at war with itself. I mean, it's calling Hungary and Poland the enemy now, or foes. I mean,
the dictatorship.
But this is really interesting, is that this is an interesting moment where, you know, things can be moved forward. I
the
mean,
rest of the world gets a respite from the United States.
And Trump was very clear when he was campaigning as president that the war was against ISIS. It wasn't against Assad. It wasn't against anyone else. He was very clear. He's going to take out ISIS. So how he's going to do that, time is going to tell. We're going to see who he has to cooperate with. He's going to have to cooperate with Russia and Iran in some sort of way in order to take out ISIS. But an even more interesting point was, and I know Mark can speak on this a lot better, was you also had John McCain visiting Syria, visiting Saudi Arabia, and visiting Turkey. And we all know wherever John McCain goes,
will these military
trouble
figures
happens.
in Trump's cabinet, will the deep state allow Trump to cooperate with Russia?
And John
Iran?
McCain is coordinating as a deep state official.
John McCain is running his own neocon foreign policy.
he thinks he's president. I think he really thinks he's president.
I think we can agree on one thing. If Trump wants to defeat ISIS, he first has to defeat McCain. He has to defeat not the media, but the people behind the media. These guys with micros and pens, they're not the threat. The guys behind them.
We've been through this. We keep saying this, okay? He has to fight at home to win abroad here. We'll run out of time, guys. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.